The International Booker Prize Longlist was announced last week. Let's see what books sound interesting and what's going on my TBR. I'm Veronica, and this is the Reading Chronicles. Of the books, Natasha Brown, chair of this year's judges, says, many of the submitted books examine the devastating consequences of war, which is reflected in our long list. The list also features petty squabbles between neighbors, mysterious mountain villages, big pharma conspiracies, witchy women, ill-fated lovers, a haunted prison, and obscure film references. The page counts range from pocket-friendly to doorstopper. And while the book's original publication date spanned 4 decades, each story feels fresh and innovative. Let's see what they have to offer. I should say this is my first time going through the list and reacting to what has been nominated, so it's possible I'm going to mispronounce some names. Please forgive that, and you can offer corrections in the comments. So the first is The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran by Shida Bazyar, translated from the German by Ruth Martin. This is described as a captivating polyphonic novel of one family's flight from and return to Iran. 1979, Besad, a young communist revolutionary, fights with his friends for a new order after the Shah's expulsion. He tells of sparking hope, of clandestine political actions, and of how he finds the love of his life in the courageous, intelligent Nahid. 1989, Nahid lives her new life in West Germany with Besad. With their young children, they spend hour after hour in front of the radio, hoping for news from others who went into hiding after the mullahs came to power. 1999, Lale returns to Iran with her mother, Nahid. Between beauty rituals and family secrets, she gets to know a Tehran that hardly matches her childhood memories. 2009, Lale's brother Mo is more concerned with a friend's heartbreak than with student demonstrations in Germany. But then the Green Revolution breaks out in Iran and turns the world upside down. A topical, moving novel about revolution, oppression, resistance, and the absolute desire for freedom. So, I'm always interested in learning more about what's happening in parts of the world that I know little about, parts of the world that are very far from me. But, what gets me about this one seems to be a multi-generational family saga. Even if we only have 2 generations, that's multi-generational. And I really love that kind of book. That is my weird, pocket subgenre that always gets me. So, of course, this one's going on my TBR. Next, we have We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela, Cabezón, Cámara, translated from the Spanish by Robin Myers. Now, I've read this book. It won the National Book Award for Translated Literature last year, so I've already read it. I read it initially in Spanish, didn't quite understand what was happening. I have since reread it in English, and I'll be giving a full review of it in the future and a wrap-up of 2025 prize winners. So, will this go on my TBR? No, because I've already read it. But here's the description for the book in case you're interested in learning more about it. So the publisher says, deep in the wilds of the New World, Antonio de Arauso begins to write a letter to his aunt, the prioress of the Basque convent he escaped as a young girl. Since fleeing a dead-end life as a nun, he's become Antonio and undertaken monumental adventures. He has been a cabin boy, mule driver, shopkeeper, soldier, and conquistador. Now caring for 2 Guarani girls he rescued from enslavement and hounded by the army he deserted, this protean protagonist contemplates one more metamorphosis. Based on a real figure of the Spanish conquest, We Are Green and Trembling is a queer Baroque satire, a surreal picaresque rich with wildly imaginative language and searing critique of subjugation, colonialism, and tyranny of all kinds. In this masterful subversion of Latin American history, Cabezón Cámara finds in the rainforest a magically alive space where transformation is not only possible, but necessary. Lyrical and swashbuckling, tender and surreal, Cabezón, Cámara's new novel sees glimmers of hope for the future amidst a brutal history of colonization. Surreal indeed. This was a difficult novel for me to get through, particularly in my second language, but it's also a little bit difficult in my native language. So definitely an interesting story with its focus on a trans character, and this being based on a real person in history, but not the most easy book I have ever read, or I should say not the easiest book I have ever read. But you can come to your own judgments about that. I think it probably has a good chance of winning, since it has also won the National Book Award. Next is The Remembered Soldier by Anjet Daanje, translated from the Dutch by David McKay. An extraordinary love story and a captivating novel about the power of memory and imagination in Flanders, 1920-22. After serving as a soldier in the Great War, Noon Merkem has lost his memory and lives in a psychiatric asylum. Countless women responding to a newspaper ad visit him there in the hope of finding their spouse who vanished in battle. One day, a woman, Julianne, appears and recognizes Noon as her husband, the photographer Amund Coppens, or Coppens, I'm not sure which, and takes him home against medical advice. But their miraculous reunion doesn't turn out the way that Julianne wants her envious friends to believe. Only gradually do the two grow close, and Amund's biography is pieced together on the basis of Julianne's stories about him. But how can he be certain that she's telling the truth? In The Remembered Soldier, Daanje immerses us in the psyche of a war-traumatized man who has lost his identity. When Amund comes to doubt Julianne's word, the reader is caught up in a riveting spiral of confusion that only the greatest of literature can achieve. All right, initially upon reading this description, I thought it would be... it is a historical novel, historical fiction, centered on the war. Not World War II, which I am super tired of reading about, but World War I. And the idea of it kind of being a love story put me a little off of it. But this idea that a woman believes it to be her husband, believes him to be her husband, but he doesn't remember his own history, his own life, and can't be certain that what she tells him is true. I don't know. This is a little bit different from the historical war romance that I was initially thinking this book was going to be. Yeah, it's giving a little While You Were Sleeping. Granted, I've never actually seen that story or seen that movie, but I don't know. This still piques my interest, so it's going on the TBR. Next is The Deserters by Mathias Énard, translated from the French by Charlotte Mandell, or Mandel. A filthy and exhausted soldier emerges from the Mediterranean wilderness. He is escaping from an unspecified war, trying to flee incessant violence and find refuge in solitude. But a chance encounter with a civilian forces him to make a difficult decision. On September 11th, 2001, aboard a small cruise ship, a scientific conference in honoring the German mathematician Paul Heuderer, a committed communist, an anti-fascist, and survivor of Buchenwald. As these two narrative threads weave and develop, Mathias Énard's dazzling, erudite prose vividly illuminates the devastations of war. Brilliantly translated by Charlotte Mandell, The Deserters is a triumphant novel that balances the weight of love and politics, loyalty and belief, hope and survival. All right, obviously I'm interested in reading this book. It's going on the TBR. I don't know, something about this mix of this soldier escaping an unspecified war. What war is that? And that coming to clash with what happened on September 11th, this cruise ship. I don't know what's going to happen in this book, but I'm going to read it. Next is Small Comfort by Ia Genberg, translated from the Swedish by Kira Josefsson. From a successful child actor who has now turned into a failing thief, to an actor hired to give a speech at a stranger's wedding, to a couple feigning married bliss to keep their inheritance, Small Comfort brilliantly examines the value of people and money. Capturing the profound beauty of everyday moments, each tale is an evocative journey written with sharp insight and emotional depth. From the subtle undercurrents of wealth and loss to the naked vulgarity of greed, Small Comfort invites us to reflect on the ways in which material pursuits can fulfill or betray us. Whether it's illuminating the fragile comfort found in wealth or the devastating consequences of its absence, Ia Genberg's narratives resonate with universal truths about human nature, vulnerability, and ambition, and effortlessly reminds us of their deeper meaning. All right, doesn't quite have my attention the way that the previous books have. It might still be interesting to find out how all of these characters are connected and how it all comes together, what they all mean to each other in the end. But this isn't going to be on my immediate TBR. I might read it later. Obviously, if it wins, I will read it then. Next is She Who Remains by Rene Karabash, translated from the Bulgarian by Izidora Angel. High in the accursed mountains, in a village ruled by the ancient laws of the Kanun, Bekija escapes an arranged marriage by becoming a sworn virgin, renouncing her womanhood to live as a man. Her decision sets off a brutal chain of events, destroying her family and separating her from the one she loves the most. Years later, as Bekija, now Matija, tells their story to a visiting journalist, long-buried truths come to light along with the realization of all that might have been. All right, this is sort of tying into the themes that We Are Green and Trembling explored, particularly the ideas of gender and gender nonconformity. I don't know what the idea of being a sworn virgin means other than swearing to be a virgin for the rest of your life, and how this will come to her deciding to live as a man, how this will affect the rest of her life. But I'm really interested in finding out what happens with this character and what occurs through the story. So this is going on my TBR. Next we have The Director by Daniel Kehlmann, translated from the German by Ross Benjamin. An artist's life, a pact with the devil and the dangerous illusions of the silver screen. G.W. Pabst, one of cinema's greatest directors of the 20th century, was filming in France when the Nazis seized power. To escape the horrors of the new and unrecognizable Germany, he fled to Hollywood, but now under the blinding California sun, the world-famous director suddenly looks like a nobody. Not even Greta Garbo, the Hollywood actress whom he made famous, can help him. When he receives word that his elderly mother is ill, he finds himself back in the homeland of Austria, which is now called Ostmark. Pabst, his wife, and his young son are suddenly confronted with the barbaric nature of the regime. So when Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda in Berlin, sees the potential for using the European film icon for his directorial genius and makes big promises to Pabst and his family, Pabst must consider Goebbels' thinly veiled order. While Pabst still believes that he will be able to resist these advances, that he will not submit to any dictatorship other than art, he has already taken the first steps into a hopeless entanglement. Kehlmann's latest oeuvre explores the complicated relationships and distinctions between art and power, beauty and barbarism, cog and conspirator. All right, this is a World War II historical fiction, so I'm probably not going to read it. It is a little bit different than the others that I've come across. This idea that Pabst is returning to a Germany that is in the midst of the regime, that he has to decide whether or not he will make this pact with the devil for his art. I mean, obviously we have Faust. This is maybe a modern retelling of that, set during the Second World War. So that could give it a little bit of a different feel than the other World War II novels I've read. But for the moment, I'll skip it because obviously there are just so many books to read, and World War II historical fiction I haven't found to be quite up my alley. The 8th book on the long list is On Earth as It Is Beneath by Ana Paula Maia, translated from the Portuguese by Padma Viswanathan. On land where enslaved people were once tortured and murdered, the state built a penal colony in the wilderness where inmates could be rehabilitated but never escape. Now, decades later, and having only succeeded in trapping men, not changing them for the better, its operations are winding down. But in the prison's waning days, a new horror is unleashed. Every full moon night, the inmates are released, the warden is armed with rifles, and the hunt begins. Every man plans his escape, not knowing if his end will come at the hands of a familiar face or from the unknown dangers beyond the prison walls. Ana Paula Maia has once again delivered a bracing vision of our potential for violence and our collective failure to account for the consequences of our social and political action or inaction. No crime is committed out of view for this novelist, and her raw, brutal power enlists us all as witness. Going on the TBR, it's giving The Most Dangerous Game. That's all I'll say about that. Yes, if you've never read that short story, read it. It's pretty good. I mean, most of you probably read it in high school at some point, although I don't think I ever did. But I have read it since then, and it still hits. All right, next book, The Duke by Matteo Melchiorre, translated from the Italian by Antonella Lettieri. Outside Balorgana, a tiny isolated village high in the foothills of the Dolomites, the Duke lives in his villa of his aristocratic ancestors. The last in the centuries-old line of the Simamontes, he spends his days on his land and absorbed in the family archive, tolerated, if gently ridiculed, by the villagers who are his neighbors. When he finds out that the village big man is taking timber from his land, he has a decision to make. Will he stay in his glorious cerebral isolation, or will he honor his ancestral blood and take action against this affront? Matteo Melchiorre's portrait of the idiosyncratic character of the Duke and the world of Valorgana is a sweeping feat of literary imagination. With the pace, panorama, and plot twists of a great 19th century classic, the breathless story of the Duke's ensuing feud unfolds, asking some big 21st century questions about our relationships with privilege, the past, the natural world, and each other. All right, so this Duke, I'm not sure why Duke is in quotation marks in the description. What has he done to make it seem like he's not actually the Duke? Or is he not actually the Duke? I don't know. But the idea of him trying to maintain his land, or, I don't know, staying isolated, could make for an interesting novel. It doesn't quite grab my interest as some of these previous ones have, so it's not going on the TBR for the moment, but it might be something I pick up in the future. All right, number 10 on the long list is The Witch by Marie NDiaye, translated from the French by Jordan Stump. In a small French town, a mediocre witch trapped in a cruel marriage cries watery tears of blood as she passes on her gifts to her twin daughters, who soon must make a choice: stay close to the nest and the mother who nourished them, or soar away from the dead-end claustrophobia their selfish father has imposed. Lucy comes from a long line of witches with powers passed down from mother to daughter. Many of them have hidden or repressed their gifts to appease disgusted or fearful men. But against the wishes of her controlling husband, Lucy initiates her twins into their family's peculiar womanhood when they reach the age of 12. In a few short months, Maud and Lise are crying rich crimson tears, their powers quickly becoming more potent than their mother's, opening them to liberation and euphoria beyond what Lucy and her former mothers ever considered. Equal parts dreamlike and disquieting, the witch tells a tale as old as time with a dark twist. Without looking back, children fly the nest, laying bare the tenuous threads of family that have long threatened to snap. With simmering tension and increasing panic, Ndiaye's latest novel in English captures the terror and precarity of motherhood and marriage and the uncertainty of slowly realizing that your progeny are more dangerous to the world and to your heart and freer than you ever could have dreamed. All right, sounds like a novel that explores the oppression of women, particularly within a marriage, and what happens when they actually have more power than people know what to do with. So, the country, the world probably has a long history of punishing women for attempting to have power. The Salem witch trials were a direct result of that, or a direct manifestation of that, I should say. And it seems that the history of this is coming to play in this novel too. I'm going to set it aside for the moment. It's definitely something I might pick up in the future, but not something that immediately grabs my interest as a book that I need to read. Next is Women Without Men by Shahrnush Parsipur, translated from the Persian by Faridoun Farrokh. This modern literary masterpiece follows the interwoven destinies of 5 women, including a wealthy middle-aged housewife, a prostitute, and a school teacher, as they arrive by different paths to live together in an abundant garden on the outskirts of Tehran. Drawing on elements of Islamic mysticism and recent Iranian history, this unforgettable novel depicts women escaping the narrow confines of family and society and imagines their future living in a world without men. Okay. Reminiscent of a wry fable, Women Without Men creates an evocative and powerfully drawn allegory of life in contemporary Iran. Shortly after the novel's 1989 publication, Parsipur was arrested and jailed for her frank and defiant portrayal of women's sexuality. Banned in Iran, this national bestseller was eventually translated into several languages, giving new readers access to the witty and subversive work of a brilliant Persian writer. Obviously, going on my TBR. As I've said before, I'm interested in reading books set in countries that I know little about. Obviously, the themes of gender and feminism and patriarchy are present here, and those always get me. And this book is also kind of reminding me of last year's winner of the International Booker Prize, Heart Lamp by, let me look up that name, Banu Mushtaq. It's making me think about the stories in that book, which centered on women in India, particularly in Muslim communities, and the oppression they suffered as a result of their gender. This seems like a continuation of those ideas, and so I'm very interested to see how that will be translated to Tehran, or how that will be manifested in Tehran, how that will be different in a Middle Eastern country as opposed to in India. So this is definitely one that I'm going to read. The next book on the long list is The Wax Child by Olga Ravn, translated from the Danish by Martin Aitken. In 17th century Denmark, Christens Krukau, an unmarried noblewoman, is accused of witchcraft. Okay, more witchcraft here. She and several other women are rumored to be possessed by the devil, who has come to them in the form of a tall, headless man and gives them dark powers. They can steal people's happiness, they have performed unchristian acts, and they can cause pestilence or even death. They are all in danger of the stake. The Wax Child, narrated by a wax doll. Oh my god, creepy. narrated by a wax doll created by Christens Krokow, is an unsettling horror story about brutality and power, nature and witchcraft set in the fragile communities of pre-modern Europe. Deeply researched and steeped in visceral atmospheric detail, The Wax Child is based on a series of real witchcraft trials that took place in northern Jutland in the 17th century. Full of lush storytelling and alarmingly rich imagination, Olga Ravn weaves in quotes from original sources such as letters, magical spells and manuals, court documents, and Scandinavian grimoires. Okay, initially I was thinking, what, another book on witchcraft? Not really my thing. But the fact that this is partially based on real stories, that it weaves in these words from historical documents, that's different than something I've read before. And the fact that it is actually categorized as a horror story gives a little bit more meaning to the fact that it is narrated by a wax doll. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to cope with that. I don't read horror too often, and I occasionally watch horror movies, but horror isn't quite my favorite genre. I have a very overactive imagination and very vivid dreams, so those two don't really go together too well. But I am occasionally interested in reading or watching horror, so the exception might have to be made for this story. It's going on my TBR for the moment. The last book on the long list is Taiwan Travelogue by Yáng Shuāng-zǐ, translated from the Mandarin Chinese by Lin King. May 1938. The young novelist Ayoma Shizuko has sailed from her home in Nagasaki, Japan, and arrived in Taiwan. She's been invited there by the Japanese government ruling the island, though she has no interest in their official banquets or imperialist agenda. Instead, Shizuko longs to experience real island life and to taste as much of its authentic cuisine as her famously monstrous appetite can bear. I identify with that. Soon, a Taiwanese woman who is younger even than she is and who shares the characters of her name is hired as her interpreter and makes her dreams come true. The charming, erudite, meticulous Chizuru arranges Shizuko's travels all over the land of the South and also proves to be an exceptional cook. Over scenic train rides and braised pork rice, lively banter, and winter melon tea, Shizuko grows infatuated with her companion and intent on drawing her closer. But something causes Chizuru to keep her distance. It's only after a heartbreaking separation that Shizuko begins to grasp what the something is. Disguised as a translation of a rediscovered text by a Japanese writer, this novel was a sensation on its first publication in Mandarin Chinese in 2020 and won Taiwan's highest literary honor, the Golden Tripod Award. Taiwan Travelogue unburies lost colonial histories and deftly reveals how power dynamics inflect our most intimate relationships. Okay. This idea of the book being a translation of a rediscovered text is interesting to me. It's sort of like a frame novel. So we might think of how The Handmaid's Tale is framed as, minor spoilers for The Handmaid's Tale. It's sort of framed as a discovery of a historical text of a time that thankfully no longer exists. Or how, Frankenstein is frame within a frame within a frame of each of these characters telling their stories of their encounters with the creature and with Dr. Frankenstein. I particularly enjoy when stories take that sort of structure because it's not done often, and probably because it's really difficult to do. I haven't seen it done poorly, but also because I've only seen it done very few times. So I'll be interested to see how it works out here and how it, helps to tell the story of these two women who have similarities and what this something is that causes this woman in Taiwan to keep her distance from the woman coming from Japan. So yeah, that's going on my TBR. All right, those were the 13 books on the Booker International Longlist. The shortlist of 6 books will be announced on Tuesday, March 31st, and the winner will be announced in London on Tuesday, May 19th. Which of these books are you interested in reading? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next video.